2 years ago, Pensacola was the Gulf Coast's safe haven, a thriving military hub where service families could afford a home on their housing allowance, confident that orders wouldn't put them underwater. Now, the Pensacola housing market crisis is forcing military parents to sell at a loss, draining savings, and sometimes face foreclosure, all because insurance premiums have quadrupled and government allowances can't catch up. Service members who defend the nation are trapped by the very homes they once saw as a reward for their sacrifice. Why did Pensacola, once the military's best-kept secret, become a financial minefield for those who can't afford to wait? The answer starts before the storm. In 2019, Pensacola stood out as the rare Gulf Coast city where military families could buy a home without fear of financial overreach. The Naval Air Station anchored more than 16,000 active duty personnel, and nearly a third of all home sales involved military buyers. At that time, the median price for a house hovered between $195,000 and $215,000. For an E5, the basic allowance for housing ranged from $1,200 to $1,400 per month, enough to cover a typical mortgage with some room for insurance and utilities. Home insurance averaged $1,500 to $2,000 per year, and most properties stayed on the market just 35 to 45 days before finding a buyer. Zero-down VA loans accounted for 35 to 40% of all transactions, making home ownership accessible even to junior enlisted members with little saved. The rhythm of life followed the permanent change of station cycle. Every 2 to 3 years, families rotated in and out, selling and buying on a predictable schedule set by orders, not by market swings. Even as the region worked to recover from Hurricane Michael in 2018, Pensacola's housing market offered a sense of security and stability. For many, it was the closest thing to a financial safe harbor on the Gulf Coast. Carlos Rodriguez sits at his kitchen table, PCS orders in hand, his wife across from him, 2 kids playing in the next room, and a third on the way. In early 2021, the decision seemed clear. The Navy had just approved his transfer to Pensacola, and the housing market, though heating up, still felt within reach. With a VA loan, zero down, and steady pay as an E6, Carlos could buy a new 3-bedroom home for $335,000. The mortgage company assured him the monthly payment would fit inside his basic allowance for housing, just as it always had before. No one mentioned how quickly things could change. Every military family knows the clock starts ticking the moment those orders are issued. Carlos calculated the numbers again and again. BAH, base salary, projected expenses. He remembered the advice from senior chiefs. Buy when you arrive, build a little equity, sell when you leave. The plan worked for decades. He and his wife pictured birthday parties in the backyard, a nursery for the new baby, a safe place to weather the next deployment. The paperwork moved fast. Within weeks, the Rodriguez family owned a home near the base, joining thousands of other service members who trusted the system to protect them from risk. But the market was already shifting. Prices jumped by the month. Insurance agents warned of new storms, but no one predicted how quickly costs would outpace pay. Still, for Carlos, the house was more than numbers. It was a promise that every move, every sacrifice, would add up to something secure. As the months passed, that promise began to unravel. By spring of 2021, Pensacola's housing market looked nothing like the steady, predictable cycle military families once counted on. Remote workers from Atlanta and Birmingham arrived in waves, drawn by the promise of Gulf Coast living and the ease of working from anywhere. Agents fielded calls from buyers, ready to make offers, sight unseen, sometimes above asking price. Listings that once lasted a month now disappeared in days, sometimes hours. The median home price shot past $215,000, then $250,000, then $300,000, and just kept climbing. By the end of 2022, The median hit $365,000, a leap of $150,000 in less than 2 years. Investors took notice. National short-term rental companies and local speculators snapped up houses near the water, converting family homes into vacation listings. In some neighborhoods, nearly 1 in 5 buyers was an investor, not a resident. Bidding wars became routine, with sellers fielding a dozen offers and buyers waiving inspections just to compete. The supply of available homes dropped to record lows. Barely 1,000 houses on the market at the peak of the frenzy. Developers raced to fill the gap, breaking ground on new subdivisions in Beulah, Pace, and Gulf Breeze. Construction trucks lined the streets, framing new houses as fast as permits would allow. But demand kept outpacing supply. Local families found themselves priced out of the neighborhoods they grew up in. Military buyers, used to steady basic allowance for housing formulas and zero-down VA loans, now faced competition from cash offers and out-of-state money. Every month brought new record highs. The old rules no longer applied. For a brief moment, it seemed like Pensacola had become a boom town, until the first signs of strain began to show. In the summer of 2022, 2 Navy officers, both O3s, signed the papers on a 4-bedroom house in Gulf Breeze. They had just returned from separate deployments, eager to start a family and put down roots. The listing price was $425,000, pushed higher by a line of bidders who never even toured the property. Their realtor called it a smart investment, a hedge against the rental squeeze and a market that seemed to rise by the week. With dual incomes and a VA loan, the numbers worked, barely. The monthly payment stretched their basic allowance for housing, but the promise of stability outweighed the risk. By the time the moving boxes were unpacked, the insurance bill arrived. What started as a $5,000 quote ballooned to $12,500 per year after their first renewal. The carrier cited new flood maps, higher wind deductibles, and a string of carrier exits from the Panhandle. Their escrow account drained in months, forcing them to dip into savings meant for emergencies. When one spouse received overseas orders, the equation changed again. They needed to sell, fast. The house went on the market at a $50,000 discount, but weeks passed with no offers. Each price cut chipped away at what little equity they hoped to salvage. Voice notes to the command financial counselor grew more anxious. How do we pay this and keep the house when one of us is deploying? The answer never changed. The math no longer worked. The insurance premium alone now equaled one of their paychecks. Every month, another couple in their circle faced the same dilemma, forced to choose between draining their savings or walking away. For this O3 family, the dream of home ownership in Pensacola became a burden too heavy to carry. The market that once rewarded risk now punished it, turning optimism into anxiety with every unanswered showing and every new bill in the mail. Insurance premiums in Pensacola did not just rise, they exploded. By 2025, the average annual cost for a standard home policy had jumped to between $4,500 and $8,500. On the waterfront, bills climbed even higher, with some homeowners facing $10,000 to $18,000 a year just to stay covered. Wind deductibles alone now range from $5,000 to $15,000, payable out of pocket if a hurricane hits. Flood insurance, once a minor line item, now adds $800 to $3,500 annually for those in FEMA-mandated zones. For many military households, these numbers are not theoretical. Lenders require both wind and flood coverage to close on a VA loan, and every new quote lands like a punch, sometimes changing by thousands of dollars between contract and closing. The basic allowance for housing has not kept up. In 2019, an E5 could cover a $1,200 mortgage and basic insurance with a BAH of $1,350. Today, BAH sits at $1,550, but the combined cost of mortgage and insurance now tops $2,500 a month. That leaves a $950 gap. Every single month, before even counting utilities or taxes. For a junior enlisted family earning $35,000 to $45,000 a year, the math simply does not work. Agents report that nearly a quarter of military home contracts now collapse when final insurance quotes arrive. Buyers find themselves forced to walk away, lose deposits, or drain savings just to close. The insurance market in Pensacola has turned what used to be a manageable risk into a financial cliff, and military families are the first to go over the edge. 20 years in uniform. That's what it took for Tom Jenkins to finally settle down on Pensacola Beach. He retired from the Navy in 2021, bought a house for $480,000, close enough to smell the salt air, far enough to feel secure from the next big storm. His pension promised $2,800 a month, enough to cover the mortgage, groceries, and the long-awaited peace of mind that comes with a lifetime of service. But the first insurance renewal shattered that promise. By 2025, his annual premium had climbed to $15,000, more than $1,200 every month, just to keep the house insured. That's before flood coverage or the wind deductible if a hurricane ever hits. The math no longer works. The home he bought as a reward for service is now worth $360,000, a $120,000 loss on paper. Selling would mean walking away from decades of savings and the last piece of stability he thought he'd earned. Every year, the premium takes a bigger bite out of his pension. Each hurricane season brings new letters from the carrier, higher rates, stricter terms, another warning that coverage could disappear altogether. Tom's story is not unique. On the waterfront, insurance costs have outpaced even the steepest property tax bills. For many retired veterans, the dream of a secure retirement on the Gulf has turned into a monthly calculation of risk and regret. The system that once rewarded service now threatens to erase its value, leaving those who served with impossible choices: burn through savings, sell at a loss, or simply walk away. Sasha Miller spent 3 years saving every extra dollar from her E5 pay, skipping nights out and driving a 10-year-old sedan, all for a shot at her first home in Pensacola. By spring 2024, the market had cooled just enough to give her hope. She found a modest house near the base, signed the contract, and locked in her VA loan approval. The numbers looked tight, but possible. A $3,500 annual insurance quote, manageable with her basic allowance for housing and careful budgeting. 2 weeks before closing, her phone buzzed with a new email from the insurance agent. The premium had jumped to $7,200, more than double the original quote. The lender ran the numbers again. The debt-to-income ratio no longer passed VA guidelines. Her approval vanished overnight. There was no appeal, no extra time. The seller moved on to the next buyer. Sasha's $5,000 earnest money deposit, saved over years, was gone. She sat in her car outside the real estate office staring at the denial letter. She had done everything right. Checked her credit, followed the rules, trusted the system. Now, the dream of homeownership was out of reach, not because of a missed payment or a bad decision, but because an insurance company changed its mind at the last minute. For Sasha, and for hundreds like her, the promise of the VA loan became a trap. The house slipped away, and so did the sense of security that once came with serving her country. A security officer at the base scans a spreadsheet: names, ranks, credit scores, mortgage delinquencies. In Pensacola, the numbers are no longer just statistics. They are warnings. Missed payments, short sales, and foreclosures now show up in background checks, and every red flag is a threat to a military career. Nationally, almost half of all security clearance denials come from financial distress. In 2025, local commanders report that nearly 1,000 billets have gone unfilled or were relocated because service members could not find or keep affordable housing. The chain of command sees the pattern. mortgage shortfalls, insurance bills that outstrip the basic allowance for housing, families forced to walk away from homes. Each foreclosure or ruined credit score can trigger a clearance review. Without clearance, a sailor or airman cannot do their job. Early separations rise. As families decide the risk is too high, mission readiness weakens, not from a lack of skill, but from a system that makes stability impossible. The cost isn't measured in dollars alone. It's measured in empty posts, lost experience, and the quiet resignation of those who once planned to serve a full career. Pensacola's economy stands on two pillars, military and tourism. When one falters, the other feels the shock. In 2025, both are under strain. Local economists track the numbers. Home inventory is up by more than 60%, yet buyers vanish as insurance costs surge. The market now takes 6 to 8 months to absorb new listings, double the time from just a few years ago. Vacation rentals, once a steady source of income and jobs, are being liquidated in waves as investors face insurance premiums topping $10,000 a year. Hotels and restaurants along the Gulf see fewer bookings, a ripple effect from families and visitors tightening their budgets. Military spending once guaranteed a baseline of stability for local businesses. Now, with military home buyers down 30% since 2021, that safety net is fraying. Policy analysts warn that without urgent reforms, such as recalibrating basic allowance for housing to match real costs or capping insurance premiums, the entire community faces long-term decline. The crisis in housing is no longer isolated to those in uniform. It stretches across the city, threatening the livelihoods of thousands who depend on both steady orders and steady tourism. In Pensacola, the fate of the military and the local economy are inseparable. In 2019, Pensacola's median home price stood at $195,000 to $215,000, with military families making up nearly 30% of buyers. Today, the same families face insurance premiums as high as $8,500, 4 times their pre-crisis levels. While typical basic allowance for housing increases have lagged far behind. Documented losses show military homeowners underwater by $30,000 to $55,000, forced to sell on permanent change of station orders regardless of market conditions. VA zero-down loans, once a lifeline, now trap families who cannot cover the gap. While the Department of Defense acknowledges the basic allowance for housing lag, there is no public plan to match local realities or address the insurance exodus. The full impact on national security is not yet quantified, as readiness and clearance data remain restricted. What is clear is this: over 16,000 active duty service members and their families in Pensacola now face a crisis where serving the nation means risking their financial future.